Okay, so this is Brian Horner, Curator of Collections at the Estes Park Museum. Today is April 10th, 2015. We are at the Estes Park Museum, and I am interviewing local business owner Rob Pieper about his experience during the flood of September 2013. So, to start off, could you please tell us your full name and your occupation?
I'm Rob Pieper. My wife and I own Poppies and Mama Rosa's downtown. We've owned Poppies for about 20 years and Mama's for 13 now.
Could you give us a bit of a geographical description of where those are located downtown?
We are located right in the downtown area. We are on East Elkhorn, right across from the Estes Valley Library. We are sitting on the riverside. We're about 20 feet from the river.
When did you first realize that something catastrophic was happening, that this was going to be a big deal?
I received the reverse 911 at about 6:20 that Thursday morning and didn't think much of it. The day before, the river was at the normal height. We've had large runoff before, so I wasn't too concerned, but for some reason about 6:30 I decided I'm going to go down and just check on things, just see what was going on. So I went down to the restaurants at about 6:30, got there about 6:40, and the river was far from anything to worry about. A couple of guys from the town walked by, asked me if we were planning on being open for lunch, because that block was their area that they were keeping an eye on. I said, sure, I'll hold a table by the window so you can still keep an eye on the river and everything. So, that was about 7. We still had a couple of feet to go for water. Wasn't worried at all. It wasn't until about 8:30, it had really come up a lot. I had a board meeting that morning at 9 o'clock, and at about 8:45, I called Julie, my wife, and said, can you let them know I'm not going to make the board meeting? I'm going to stay down here for a little bit longer, just to keep an eye on things. At that point, I got a phone call from the Red Cross that needed some sandwiches made. So I said, sure. Went back to the kitchen that has no windows. Making a few sandwiches. They only did about 50 or so. So I ran back there, started making sandwiches. Then all of a sudden, my cell phone started to ring. The restaurant phone started to ring. I was getting texts. I thought, okay, I'm going to answer some of these. So I answered a call, and someone said, is that your car parked out front? I said, yeah. I'll get it moved. If it's in your way, I'm sorry. You need to get it out of there. It's starting to hit the back of your bumper. So I went back out in the dining room, and the water was coming up in the plaza area then, the highest I'd ever seen it. At that point, I thought, okay, this is not normal. I haven't seen it this high before. So I kind of went back, did a couple more sandwiches, went back out in the plaza, walked up the Riverwalk a little bit, and it had come up even more in 10 minutes. At that point, I thought, I don't think we're going to open today. Went back into the kitchen, phone just kept ringing off the hook. I went back out in the dining room, and the first trickle of water had started to come in about 9:30, 9:45. First thing I did was I grabbed a mop, and then I realized, I don't think this is going to work. And then I decided to try to get out to my car and go home. At that point, when the water was entering the building, I thought, okay, this is not normal.
So in the course of about 3 hours that morning, the river went from high normal runoff level to coming into the building?
Yeah, it was about 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours. Even when I first got down there, it wasn't even what I would consider to be high runoff. There's a stump along the riverside, the riverbank, that I use as my guide. that I know when the water is high, if I need to come back down and check every couple of hours during runoff. And it was still a foot from there, which is thousands, millions of gallons of water a second in that 1 foot. And within 3 hours going up that much, I knew it wasn't going to be a normal runoff type river that day.
When you first realized how high the water was going to get and that it wasn't going to be a normal day, what were kind of your first thoughts at that point?
I really didn't have any thoughts. I still felt like, okay, a little bit of water came in the front door. It's going to start going down. It's just a rainstorm. It wasn't anything overly massive. When I went directly home and started to make sure all my staff were accounted for. A couple of them spend some time down in the valley with their parents are divorced and would spend a night down with their dad down in the valley. So we spent a few minutes trying to find all the staff. Everyone was accounted for, fairly quickly by noon that day. Then I started hearing people talking about how their road was washed away or their driveway was washed away. And we just live a block from the downtown area. You can't see anything, but the sound of the river just kept getting louder and louder. Sitting out on our front deck, we could just hear it. So we knew it was getting much more serious than I ever thought it was. But still, in my mind, it's just water, it's just a river. So I didn't really have too much concern until later that afternoon when I couldn't get a hold of my mom, who lives on the opposite side of the river from us. I couldn't get a hold of my sister. And then I knew it was a much bigger deal than I had originally given it credit for.
How did you react to that realization?
At first, Julie and I were both, I think it was a little bit of shock we wanted to make sure our car was filled with gas. We went and looked through the refrigerator just to make sure that we had food. We knew we didn't have to worry about food because we have 2 restaurants. There's plenty of food down there. We knew there'd be enough for the staff if they needed it. I think we did kind of that original panic. We went and filled up our cars with gas right away. By mid-afternoon, it became much more somber for us when we kept our internet the whole time, so we could see people's postings. We could get text from anybody else who had emails or messaging from people. And when people from all across the country started, friends and some of our regulars would send me a message, usually on Facebook, about what's going on, we knew it was a much more serious thing. So we were a little bit, at that point, we didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't know what the damage would be, what we'd walk into when we could get back down to the restaurants. We had a rehearsal dinner for a longtime employee the next day on Friday night. And we thought, no, sure, yeah, we'll be able to get open for them. The forecast was for the rain to quit, or at least lessen during the night. So we were ready to do the rehearsal dinner the next night.
When were you able to first go back downtown, or when did you first go downtown to see how high the water had actually gotten? We
walked down Friday morning. It was late morning when we walked down. We couldn't get very close, but we could be across Elkhorn Avenue over by the library, and the water had gone down. And so we were able to see where the mud was. It was a really hard perspective because you couldn't see exactly how deep it had gotten, how much water might be in the building. So we didn't really have an idea. We thought it looked like no water had entered Mama's because we could see a water line from across there. And when we looked across the street and over to the restaurants and then up the hill, there was blue sky peeking through, and it was very hopeful to see the blue sky, knowing that it was over and not walking into the building. From the outside, it didn't look like it would be very much. It was later that day that Frank Lancaster had tweeted a picture of coming through the plaza outside Poppy's door, that you could see that there was considerable silt and mud in the plaza. So I knew at that point there was probably more had entered the building than I had thought or hoped for. So it wasn't until that tweet that I went, okay, I'm not sure what we're going to find when we open the door.
I'm going to back up a little bit real quick. Before you went home on Thursday, did you have an opportunity to, or think to try and take any sort of precautions, some sandbags or anything like that, or?
We didn't have any sandbags. I knew they had a few sandbags available at the town. I didn't have an opportunity to run out. A couple of the staff members had texted me and said, we'll run out and grab some. And it's like, I don't want you to be out on this, so stay home. I took as much of the electrical and computer equipment as possible. I got it up as far off the floor as possible. I put a couple of things in front of a couple of doors. A couple of neighbors that have businesses down the way from us had brought up some sandbags to put in front of our doors. In front of, I think, 3 of them, they had enough sandbags for that. They had, 5, 6 sandbags that they put in front for us. But other than that, it happened so quickly. I didn't expect the water to rise so fast, so we didn't have a chance to do very much at all.
Was your home affected at all by the event, or?
Our house was completely, we are up on a hill, so we didn't have any at all. We have a walkout basement in our condo, and we were actually doing some work in the guest bathroom down there. So we had one wall against the rock that we had the drywall pulled out, so we could really keep an eye if anything was seeping through, and we were everything was fine.
Once you were able to go down and see what had happened, how soon was it after that you were able to get in and actually be able to tell firsthand how much water had come in, how high things had gotten?
We got into the restaurant for a little bit on Saturday morning. There was the town meeting, and we went to that. We had contacted all of our staff and said to meet us at the town meeting. If you wanted to come to the meeting, come to that, but then we would all meet afterwards over in Bond Park, and then anyone who wanted to go over with us could go over with us. The town told us that we could go in for a limited time until they had inspectors come in to make sure everything was safe. So we went over, it was probably about noon on Saturday. At that point, even looking at things, you didn't know how much damage there was. You could see some watermarks on a couple of places. I could see, a quarter of an inch of mud across the floor. So being optimistic, I thought all we have to do is get a shop vac, vacuum all that up, shampoo the carpet, and it'll be okay. But then when we started opening walk-in doors and seeing how water was just sitting, We did, when we got over to Mama's, we did find in the ladies' room, in the very far back corner, about a square foot that did not have mud on it. So we didn't get it completely 100% covered.
What did you guys do during the during the interim before you could get back in? That Thursday afternoon, Friday. What were you doing during that time?
We were lucky that we kept our internet throughout the whole ordeal. I was able to watch the news, see what the Denver stations were saying about the flood up here and down the canyons. My sister in Nebraska was messaging me on Facebook because she couldn't call. She was worried about my mom. My mom lost her internet, but she lived in town, so I could call her. And the whole time I'm trying to tell my sister in Nebraska, Mom is okay. Mom is saying, her driveway is fine. She's got plenty of food. She doesn't need to get out. Everything is okay. Returning messages through Facebook was most of them, a few tweets of people asking what was going on. We were kind of glued to our computers and our TV for that afternoon. Whenever anything like this happens, Julie and I kind of take shifts. I'm a night owl, so I'll stay up and watch the news and keep track of things, and she'll sleep for a few hours, and then she'll get up and I'll go to bed while we watch things. And that Thursday night, it was early Friday morning, our internet provider messaged me and said, I'm not going to be able to keep your internet. I know how important it's been to you to communicate with your mom and your family, and I'm not going to be able to keep it up for you, and I'm sorry. And I said, you're doing everything you can. I made sure and got everybody messaged saying our internet's going down, don't know when we'll be able to communicate out of the valley again, but just know that everybody is safe, everybody is home, there's nothing to worry about. Woke up, a few hours later, still had internet. And then that kind of gave me a sense of relief knowing that we could still communicate. I could hear the water going down, the crashing and the roar of the river that we could hear from our house had diminished tremendously. The rain had lessened, so then all of a sudden it was you felt a little bit brighter hope. You knew that the worst was over. So we thought.
Can you give us a sense of just how bad was it when you were able to go in and inspect that first time?
I wasn't sure how bad it was. It just looked like we had mud on the carpet. It wasn't until the inspectors from the town, the building inspectors came over, and the health inspector, when he got up on, I think it was Monday, he made it up. And he kept saying how bad it was. So, the first thing we did is that we knew we had to get anything that was wicking water into the drywall away. So we just started pulling up carpeting. And then we realized how much of the drywall had to be torn out. We saw all the contaminated water that had sat in there for 48 hours or so, and knowing that we had a little bit more work than we had thought originally. I'd never gone through anything like that before, so I was very lucky that I didn't have the experience. So I didn't, it was like, okay, this will only take a few weeks to get taken care of. We'll get everything ripped out, replaced, put back together again. No big deal. The more we did that, the more damage we found. So we like I said, if I knew what we were in store for, we still would have done it. Who am I kidding? We still would have done it. There was a moment, I think it was Friday night after we'd been down and saw all the mud and everything. For about 5 minutes, Julie and I talked about, we could just walk away. We could just say, after 20 years, it's time to just walk away, start all over again. But that lasted, like I said, 5 minutes, and we thought, no, we've got, I think at the time we had 38 people on staff. We counted the number of kids that our staff had in school, and I think there were 22 or 23. It's like, no, we'll just do what has to be done.
What did you guys do with or for your staff during the time where you were cleaning up? Did you have them help in some ways? Or, how did that work, I guess, the cleanup process?
We had an all-staff meeting, anyone who wanted to attend. And that was on Wednesday or Thursday after the flood, once we kind of assessed what had to be done, where we knew at Poppy's we basically had to gut 4 feet down. At Mama's the damage wasn't quite as bad. And we told them, they had their option. You can either file unemployment, here's a number, here's a website, do what's best for you, or if you want to stay on, we can pay you 40 hours a week. We can't do overtime, and we can take it one day at a time. I told him I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have no idea what the first step is. I have no idea. There's no schedule. I'm winging it. And all of them, I ended up laying off 3 people, and they didn't have a choice. One woman had just finished chemotherapy about 4 weeks before the flood, and I didn't want her in with any toxins at all. So it's like, you don't have a choice. You are not allowed in the restaurants or downtown until the health department, until I'm confident you can be in there. And then I laid myself and Julie off. Those were the 3 people we laid off. Everyone else at that staff meeting, a couple of them said, I'm going to file unemployment and see what happens. Everyone else at that meeting, one guy raised his hand and he said, I used to be a commercial drywaller. I worked for a team down in Denver. Give me 3 guys, I can teach them. Someone else said, I used to work for a master painter down in Fort Collins. Any painting that you need done, we can do. One guy said, I'm a woodworker. Any woodworking that needs to be done, I have the tools, I have the equipment. Someone had called me that morning and said, that we left after the flood, but here's where we hide our house key. I've got a woodworking shop in my garage. Help yourself to any tools that you need. All of a sudden, every staff member started to raise their hand and saying, I've never laid carpet before, but teach me. Find somebody who can teach me. So out of the 37 people, we had 32 that worked construction and demolition. Many of them, they worked their 40 hours. Our computer system was completely down, so we gave them note cards. Every week they had to fill in a time card. And they'd grab from the little box their card, and they'd write the time they got there and the time they left. More than half of them would come and write down when they were leaving, 3 o'clock. They put their card back in, and they put their gloves back on and go work. And it's like, I thought you were leaving. Oh no, this hour's for you. This hour's on me this time. And more than half of them probably worked 45 to 50 hours a week where they donated part of their time to us, which was very inspiring. It was, if these guys have the faith that we can get opened again, I've got to keep the faith. I've got to keep pushing forward. Some days when you'd walk in, the first day when we got everything gutted, we had the drywall all pulled out, and I walked in the front door, and that morning it was just kind of shocking. I walked in the front door, and they were working in the back. And for the first time, I could see all the way through the restaurant. All I saw were studs and mud. And I thought, this is really overwhelming. This is more than we can do. But they were there with their saws, with their masks on and bottles of bleach, cleaning up the mud, bleaching down the studs, the hum of blowers and dehumidifiers that we listened to for, 10 days at Mama Rose's and 14 days at Poppy's. I can't listen to a fan anymore. It's not a pleasant white noise anymore.
What kind of interactions did you have with other business owners at that time?
It was really nice because, you know your neighbors. They're in the plaza. Diane Muno owns two of the businesses there, and the a la carte, the Uribis. We've known them, we've worked with them. We're friends. People up and down the street that were just, I've known them, talked to them, could tell you birthdays and things, but we all of a sudden, when you needed a break from your environment, you'd take a little walk. And I've made some very good friends who are neighbors that I don't think I would have met on that personal level that I did before. Some of the businesses were able to get open. Starbucks got open fairly quickly after the flood. I think they were open within 10 days. After they got reopened, every morning I would come, and outside of our door would be one of their big things of coffee, 10 cups, cream, sugar, flavoring for the coffee for all the staff who was there, since our coffee machines and all of our equipment was down. People would come up and say, okay, I'm tired of working on my business, what do you need here? And we'd make lunch. We had some food that wasn't damaged in the flood, and my staff would make lunch for each other and invite anybody in the plaza to come down and have lunch with us. So we'd sit out in the plaza once we get that all cleaned up and have a picnic. So it's almost like a little community block party where there'd be maybe 15 of my staff working, 5 or 6 of the other people from neighboring businesses would come down and have a turkey sandwich that day.
What type of interactions did you have with town officials, the building inspectors, the health inspector?
They were unbelievably helpful. First thing I did was on Friday morning was sent the health inspector an email saying, what do we do? What can I save? What do I have to throw away? Give me my guidelines. He reached out as quickly as he could. I was concerned about food spoilage, anything that I had to throw away, since we didn't have trash pickup. The trash couldn't get downtown and get to our dumpsters. What do I do with all this stuff? I threw everything in the freezer, thinking that would at least give me time to decide how to deal with it. And Tom, our health inspector, Chris, our health inspector, messaged me back and said, I made arrangements for some big roll-off dumpsters through Waste Management. And told me where they'd be located at. Get as much stuff there as you can. And I think that was on Tuesday he got that up here for us. And you have to get it there by 5 o'clock because we have to remove it because of the bear. And so I asked him, how am I going to be charged for this? Because I have a lot of stuff from 2 restaurants that will be put into the dump. And he said, oh no, Larimer County is taking care of that. You don't have to worry about that. You have other things to worry about. Frank Lancaster, the town administrator, he came in, he was there, I think Monday morning, just walking the street, checking on everyone. He joined us for lunch that day. A couple of the trustees stopped by. Wendy Koenig probably stopped by at least every other day the first 10 days, just very concerned. And she was just going into every business with the town officials. If I had a question, if I had to leave a message or send an email, they responded. I don't know how they responded so quickly. It was just, you expect half a day, they would respond within 10 minutes. I was surprised one time, I sent an email expecting an email response, but they sent somebody over to show me, not just to tell me. One time I called Will with a question and left a message for him. He wasn't in the office. And a few minutes later, I get a phone call on my cell, and it's a number I didn't recognize, and I answered it, and it was Will. And he was taking the day off. It's like, why did you return my call if it's a day off? And he said, well, your question was urgent. The first time he'd had a day off in 2 weeks, first time he had an hour off, and the town returned my call. The police department, granted, one day, I can't remember which officer it was, I was driving through the Safeway parking lot, and the police car behind me flashes his lights and pulls me over, and I thought, okay, what did I do? Did I hit someone? I'm a little preoccupied, so did I clip somebody's car? What happened? And it was one of the officers. And he said, no, I'm sorry, Rob. I've been meaning to try to make it down and check on you to see if you guys were doing okay, if you needed some help, but I just haven't had time. We've been so busy. And I saw you driving through the parking lot. I just wanted to say hi, see if you're doing okay. And that happened all the way through the whole process of getting opened again. When I needed to get a building permit, by the time we realized that one of the walls we had to tear down, we found kind of late in the game through the construction, and got the building permit in late, so it was at the bottom of the pile. And I had some concerns about that, and our contractor who got the building permit for us went over and told them the situation. We were worried about mold that we weren't aware of earlier. And the building department simply said, we'll find your application, just go, get it taken care of, we'll be over in 5 minutes with a signed permit for you. They were fantastic. Just anytime you turned around, they were there for you.
What were some of the most challenging problems that came up?
The whole process of just the construction and what we had to do to gut the building had a lot of challenges to it. It was finding the little things like, oh gee, one of the walls that when we tore out the drywall, we found that they had built a wall around the original wall. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, what do we do here? We're going to have to do more than we thought. There was a crack in a tile that the water had set on that you could really see once the water sat there, and we found when we brought up those tiles that there was a floor drain there that we needed to get taken care of. Had no idea it was there for 20 years until the flood. It's like, okay, got to get this fixed. We found a lot of where water had come in from the outside, where there was a gap between the foundation and the building. Some things like that we found when we pulled up some of the hardwood flooring at Mama's, where there were bolts sticking out that we had to go get a saw to file those down and get rid of those bolts sticking through the concrete. All of those things you could pretty much work through how to manage. The staff was getting tired. They were doing things that were completely out of their comfort zone. One of my managers rented, I think it was a 28-foot U-Haul to go down to, I think we went to Home Depot. They didn't have the drywall and things that we needed at the lumberyard here, so she jumped in a U-Haul and drove it down Highway 7 through Central City and Blackhawk to go down to Denver. She'd never driven a truck that big before. She had no idea. She took one of our other employees who does a lot of handiwork with her to help get the things. And I had talked to someone down there, so we knew what we needed. But she spent the entire day driving a truck in Denver traffic on mountain roads that she was not used to, in a vehicle that she didn't know how to drive. And I know she was stressed, which made Julie and I stressed. We had staff doing things that they had never done before. And so it was those moments when personally we'd be kind of down and a little discouraged. We'd finish the day feeling very defeated, but we knew we had to pick ourselves up for the next morning when we had to face the staff again. And we had to be a cheerleader. We had to be coaches. And there were days that I probably should have stayed home and just said, I need to decompress for 8 hours and then I'll come in. But I just knew I couldn't do that. So that was the biggest challenge for me, was every day. I don't want to say I was putting on an act, but there were days that I think everyone in town was they felt defeated. They didn't know what was going to bring that day. That day was something we had no idea what we would do. We took one day at a time, and usually within 15, 20 minutes, something would happen that made you realize, no, we're going to make it through this. Either someone in town would stop by with a plate of cookies, or a man who does woodwork. He made a beautiful cross for us, and he said, just know that you're not alone. And then when that happened, they always had perfect timing. They would walk in when I was ready to walk out, go down to the airport, and jump on whatever flight was available. But they would walk in 5 minutes, and everything was okay.
Was there a point where, or I should say, at what point did you start to see the end of the work? At what point did you start to say, we're gonna be okay. We're gonna be able to reopen, and we're gonna be able to go back to what we know?
We knew that from the very beginning. I knew that this is just a little setback. There were a lot of times throughout that I forget that, and I think the staff, sometimes you get so stuck in the here and now, you forget that the reality is actually the future. So every night after we would finish and I'd go home, I would visualize what the restaurants would be like in a year, in a month even. We were lucky that Mama's didn't have as much damage. We were only closed a month over there. And we could really see the end in sight about a week, 5 days before we opened. We really had set that goal to open on this date, and here are the steps we have to do to get there. So once we saw that, the last 3 days of getting Mama's ready to reopen was just, we were on this high because everything was in place, everything was clean, everything was ready to roll. We combined the 2 restaurants into one for about 2 months until we got Poppy's open. So that gave us the opportunity to do the physical labor, but also now have a completely different thought pattern. How do we turn 2 restaurants into one? What items are the most popular that we can give our friends that they're missing for that period? So that gave us an opportunity to think differently and to see things from a different light, from a very bright light of, here is the future. This is the reality. This is what's actually happening. It's not the construction. It's not the piles of wood that we've torn out trying to get rid of. So that was about 3 weeks after the flood that we could really see that we're almost open at Mama's. We got Mama's open, and that was just it was stressful because all the staff, we have a lot of crossover staff that work in both restaurants, but all of a sudden they had to combine their knowledge into one. And so I know we had only 1 day to train the staff on, here's your new menu. This is basically opening a brand new restaurant. Normally, we would have spent much more time training you, getting things ready, but it was important for our mental health, for our staff's mental health, to just get open, jump in, and do it. I remember the first night, we got absolutely slammed. It was so great to see all of the community support that came in that first night. We had some hiccups. We had a lot of hiccups. One of our servers who had been with us, he's been with us 12 years, one of his tables looked at him and said, "You don't know what you're doing, do you?" And he looked at them and said, "Ma'am, quite frankly, no one here does. We have no idea what we're doing. We're doing our best." Normally, I would have talked to him and said, that's not the best way to present to a guest. However, way to go. That was the perfect response. So once we got Mama's open, we knew that it was not impossible. We would just keep on working and get Poppy's open and just take it 1 day at a time.
How much longer after Mama's was opened that you were able to get Poppy's back open?
It took us almost 2 more months. I'm kind of a planner. I've got my checklists. It may not all be down on paper, but I know the steps, and I have a very internal timeline for things, at least in my mind. One thing I did not take into consideration was all of a sudden our staff would have to be split. Half of them would be working in an operating restaurant while the other half would be working construction. So all of a sudden my crew went from 30 a day to 12 to 15. So it was taking a lot longer to get Poppy's open than I thought it should have. So that took some, and that's when we started to get more tired, and some of the staff started to get on each other more. Some of the staff would work 6 hours waiting tables, then they would come over to Poppy's and work another 6 hours staining. That's a long day for them. Some of them I couldn't kick out though. They wanted to be there, so let them. A couple times I did make people go home though.
What were your days like during the construction and the cleanup?
They were pretty typical. Every day I'd get down there, not real early in the morning, 8 or 9 o'clock, and I would just do whatever I needed to be done. Unfortunately, there was a lot of time on the phone with the SBA, with FEMA, through some other things, trying to return phone calls from people who would call us, people wondering how things were going. Our doors were always unlocked, and once they opened Elkhorn, we had a lot of people who would come down to check on us, see how things were going. Some people who just wanted to see how much damage we really had. And so we were always there to talk with them or to answer any questions they had or to show them around. There was one point that we had to close off part of Poppy's because I just thought it was dangerous for people walking through that weren't staff. But they'd come in and they'd spend a few minutes talking with us. And if somebody we'd see somebody outside the window peering in, we'd invite them in to show them around a little bit. They were curious, they cared, and to spend some time with them. Most of my day was spent looking ahead what had to be done next. We're in the middle of this project right now. What's the next step? Not having experience in this, I had to really think things through a little bit more. Some of my staff very much are the people who need to know what's next. After that, what's next? So I had to accommodate all the different styles of learning and all the strengths of different staff. They'd get very frustrated if they'd walk in and I didn't know what I should have them do that day. So I always had to spend the last 2 hours of the day after everyone left to assess where we were at, what the next step would be, approximately how long it would take, and who would be the best fit for that task. And then I'd go home and always take a really hot shower at the end of that.
How long were those days for you? About how many hours were you working?
That just varied. Some days would be 12 to 14 hours. Some days would maybe be 10. It just kind of depended. We did, there was one Saturday, one Sunday. We told everyone they weren't allowed in the building that day because they had been there too much. So Julie and I thought, we went down and we started to do some things. We thought, no one else is here. We're going to take the afternoon off. And we actually walked up and down Elkhorn Avenue that day and went to Elkfest. First time I'd ever been to Elkfest. So the day, I was pretty good about being able to read myself, knowing when I'd had a long enough day. Granted, there was one day when driving home, we lived 2 blocks, 7/10 of a mile from our house. and I drove home, and I don't remember how I got home. I always take the same route, so that is, sometimes you go on autopilot, but that one day I honestly don't remember getting from A to B. I got home, I don't think I hit anyone, but I don't remember it. And that was the night that I thought, okay, I'm not going to go back down. I think I got home at about 7 o'clock that night, planning on going back down, but I just called the staff that was working and said, I'm staying home tonight. Do what you need to do, leave when you want to.
How would you describe, in general, kind of the community response to the flood?
I've always known that Estes is a strong community and really cared about the other people in town. During the flood, during the recovery, it was really just cemented that. The number of phone calls I would get in the morning from people saying, hey Rob, do you need some help today? We're not doing anything today, so we can come down and help you. It's like, no, I've got staff coming in, don't need anything. Then they'd ask me, do you know anybody in town who needs anything? What can we do to help? The number of people that came in and bought gift certificates while we were closed. It's like, I can't tell you when this gift certificate, when you can use it. Oh no, there's no hurry. Here, no, our credit card machine's not working. I can't take a credit card. Oh, okay, I'll go get a check and write you a check. Someone bought, I think it was $2,000 worth of gift certificates from us. I don't think I've seen one of them come through. Hopefully, they'll be redeeming them sometime. I thought that was a very nice way of them donating money to us. We're all proud people. We don't want to take handouts. You know, another organization came and bought a whole bunch of gift certificates. I received a card in the mail, and it had 2 checks. There are people who spend 2 weeks up here in the summertime every year with their family. The Estes Park community is not just in this valley. The flood showed me that the Estes Park community goes all across the world. I was getting emails from people from Belgium, a couple from Belgium who he had just had a stroke 6 months before the flood, and they canceled their trip that fall. He said, we weren't coming out until next spring, but if you want us to, we can fly out and give you a hand. You're going to spend your vacation in the US coming up to Estes Park to help us recover. They feel connected to this community. They're part of this community. And that, I always knew that was the case with so many people. That's how I ended up here. I felt connected to this community. But you forget that. When you're in the day-to-day grind of life, you forget how much each of us individually and how all of us as a collective community have affected the lives of people, like I said, around the world. We had a couple from Pennsylvania fly out. I think it was probably 3 weeks after the flood, came up to help. They were helping at the hotel that they were staying at. When they were done there, they'd come down and give us a hand at night. After that, I don't remember where else they had volunteered. They spent their week vacation, paid vacation time, to come up here to help. That's They don't have any ties to Estes except for that emotional tie.
What, if any, changes did you guys make to the restaurants when you cleaned up and rebuilt?
At Poppy's, we actually had to tear down some walls. There were about 3 walls we had to tear down. We found that these walls were put up on carpeting. I wasn't real confident, even with the dehumidifiers and the fans, that it was dry enough underneath there. And once we pulled out the walls, we found that, yes, there was mold growing. And so I'm very glad that we tore down these walls. So we started with kind of an empty slate. We had to get rid of all of our old booths. I wasn't confident that they were going to dry and not mold. I called a friend who used to be a college president, and his college was down in the south, and they had flooding about every 5 years. We'd go through their cafeteria, and he said, no, you just got to get rid of them. They're not going to dry out, even as dry as it is in Estes. They're not going to dry out. So we were able to start with kind of a blank canvas. So we'd sit around at night and during breaks and saying, okay, here's an empty space, what do you want to try this time? What do you think will work? So we were able to kind of start from scratch. So we made a lot of changes at Poppy's. We were able to, rather than putting the walls back where they were, we put a wall in a new place. Rather than building a wall, just leave it down. We were able to add a couple of little dividers places to give it a little bit more separation so it didn't seem like one great big room. Mama's, we didn't have as much damage and not as much structural that we could even do over there, so that didn't change as much over there. But the day that I walked in and looked from the front door and could see all the way through to the back door, realized that, we can do whatever we want. Whenever you do any kind of major renovation, to be financially responsible, we've always done things in stages. And unfortunately, that can be difficult. You have to really have things planned out. But this case, nope, we can do it all at one time, which gave us a certain sense of, it was very exhilarating to think, okay, we can make changes however we want to.
How long do you feel like it took before you guys and your restaurants were back to sort of a normal operating?
After we got both restaurants opened, the first few months, the first 6 months, we opened right before Thanksgiving. It was probably up until May, June that we had a lot of people coming in who first time up to Estes since the flood. And so it still didn't quite feel normal. We actually had to staff an extra person to answer questions. We did a sheet on the menu. The back of the menu was basically our flood story, just so everyone would know, here's the process, here's the story. And so that, all the questions didn't make it feel normal that way. All the people who wanted to come up and see how Estes was doing didn't make it feel normal. by last summer, when we kind of got into the height of things, starting in June, it was beginning to feel a little bit more normal. Once we had the music back in the plaza again, that made things feel normal. There are still days a year and a half later that don't feel normal pre-flood, and I'm not sure why. There was a day last week that it just had a whole different energy to it. I don't know why, but it was more of the energy of that first 6 months after we got reopened rather than pre-flood. But right now, 99.9% of the time, we're back to normal. And that happened probably, I'm going to say, a year after the flood. It affected me a lot more emotionally and psychologically than I thought it did. I turned the anniversary of the flood into, okay, here is the grieving has to be over. We have to go on now. And I didn't realize how much I had internalized that until kind of spending some time going, okay, something's wrong. And so I took the anniversary as it's time to take the veil off the picture. It's time to move on. And there are still moments I have to remind myself of that. You see something, or, in the winter, money's always tight. And spring is always that time where you start panicking. Can we make it to June? So the last few weeks, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, can we make it to June? So I kind of fall back to that self-pity that I had during the recovery part, which I don't think I've ever actually told anyone that before. So you should feel very honored.
Well, thank you for sharing. Is there anything else or any specific stories that you'd like to share about things that happened, or just anything else you want to mention?
Not really. I mean, there are so many stories that I could have done on a day-to-day basis. I'm glad that in order for me to be able to sleep at night, I have to make sure that my mind is completely empty. So I not really journal, but I make a lot of notes. And I'm very happy that I had made a lot of personal notes during the flood. Just my feelings, what I did that day, what I have to do tomorrow, what I did wrong that day, what I need to repair tomorrow. But so many of the reoccurring notes are the phone calls and the people that would stop in, or the little tokens that people did for us. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. All across town, the little things that people would do to reach out to you, which you forget sometimes. It takes one word. A little boy gave me a rock, and it was a rock he picked up at the ore cart, and it has a bear paw on it. And he came in, it was right before Halloween. I think it was Halloween afternoon, and he picked up this rock to give me because someone down at the ore cart said that a bear paw is for strength. And so he brought that up for me. I didn't carry it today, but on days that I think are going to be busy or a bad day, I throw it in my pocket. It's all those little things that I'll see something or will trigger something of a memory of what people did for me and for Julie and my staff. I can't eat a chocolate chip cookie now without thinking of a woman who made us 24 chocolate chip cookies and brought them down to us. I can't sit by the river and listen to the river without thinking of all these stories. I think everyone in town has thousands of stories of how the flood affected them. Sometimes it's a negative thought, but then there's always some positive, something that is truly inspirational that comes out of it. Knowing that no matter how dark something is, in this very, very moment, like I said, this is not the reality. Right now, this darkness is not the reality. If you look a week down the road, a month down the road, a year down the road, that's our reality. That's what we have to look at and focus at, not the clouds today. It's the sunshine tomorrow. And it's a hard thing to remember some days.
Thank you. Thank you for your stories and for your time. I don't have anything else.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you guys are collecting this. The work the museum is doing, collecting the histories of Estes, is very commendable. I appreciate that. I know many people do. And unfortunately, many times we forget, if we don't collect it now, it's not going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you.